I watched the orc slaves dig, doing my best not to inhale through my nose. The smell is abysmal, but that's to be expected. One can't expect a bunch of filthy creatures, who likely don't even realize how bad their stench is, trapped in confined quarters to smell like perfume. Well, perhaps a perfume for a tanner, but not one that anyone with a nose would even dream of purchasing. The male orcish vampire glanced at me nervously, then yelled for the workers to move faster. Alurgas had opted to follow my plan, likely fearing retribution from his superiors, and it had worked marvelously. He had chosen the two leaders with the weakest wills and turned them. As such, his intentions became their own, and would remain so for at least a year. Fortunately, his inner thoughts had remained with him, and these two don't have any inherent prejudices against half-breeds such as myself. I had hoped that would be the case, because things would have been difficult otherwise. Pawns that despise their king have a tendency to act willfully, and that simply will not do. I turned to the other vampiric orc. "How long?" I demanded. "To get it as big as you want, it will take another couple of weeks, sir," she bowed. 2 weeks? Too long. The loss of the Ultras Legion's second phalanx weighed heavily on my mind. They had been taken unawares by the mounted mages that have been hounding our forces since, and many of them had been captured. These orcs are annoyingly persistent. "Use your hypnosis to find 5 more weak-willed individuals, then turn them," I said with a lowered voice. "Have them begin the escape tunnel. Be certain to keep it a secret, even from the other slaves." "Yes, Your Highness. But," she trailed off. "What is it?" "Hypnosis, sir? How do we do that?" I snapped my fingers and she looked up in fright. Our eyes made contact, and I tapped into a certain darkness deep within my being. This darkness had always been a part of me, and had acted as a cold comfort in times of stress. I felt the telltale ache behind my eyes that informed me I had made contact, and pushed out toward the fledgling vampire. Her face went slack as I forced the inner recesses of her mind to activate, showing her exactly how to do what must be done. "Like this," I projected. "Teach the other one the same way I'm teaching you." "Yes, sir." I closed my eyes, cutting the spell that I had bound her with. I felt the connection sever almost immediately, and a small headache soon followed. I've been told that the headache will go away with practice, but hypnosis is just so damned impractical most of the time. "Go," I said with a wave. She bowed again and quickly turned toward the other vampire. He was busy beating an unruly slave, and she decided to wait until he was finished. Satisfied with this outcome, I left the foul-smelling pit and closed the hatch behind me. I forced air out of my nostrils to clear them and took a deep breath in. Before I could take a seat, though, a small tap came from my door. "What is it?" I asked loudly, sitting down with a sigh. "Milord, we've lost Simvalrin's First Legion. Survivors say it was the mounted mages again, but there were more of them this time," General Smarn said through the door. "Get in here, you pissant!" I shouted. The door quickly opened and closed as the general entered. He took a few steps and kneeled apologetically. I stared at him coldly. "You thought to give me such terrible news through a door?" I demanded. "My apologies, sir," he said. "I didn't think to enter." "Fine. It doesn't matter," I sighed. "Pull the other legions back into defensive positions around the village and erect barricades using timber from the surrounding forest. We have more archers joining us soon, which will put us on a more level playing field." "Yes, sir. Shall I use the orc slaves?" "No, I need them doing what they're doing. Without a proper supply pit, we're sunk. We'll punish the survivors of the defeated legions by using them as lumberjacks. The legions that aren't on duty will build the walls and anti-infantry spikes. Be sure to have the excess lumber converted to fletching, and have some pits dug while you're at it. Make certain they're wide enough to fit Narcissus." "It will be done, my lord." "Oh, and send a legion to meet the archers and escort them here. I doubt that the commanders in the city were smart enough to send a large infantry force with them, and we don't want them getting ambushed and routed." "Yes, sir. That will be all. Leave me." I gave a dismissive gesture. General Smarn stood, and as he left, a wave of exhaustion washed over me. Things hadn't gone quite as planned, but all wasn't lost yet. I debated sending a legion or two accompanied by archers on the offensive, but decided against it. We only have enough archers for defensive positions, and vacating those positions would leave us critically vulnerable. The enemy likely wouldn't know that, but it's best not to give them the chance to get lucky if it can be avoided. I stood and walked over to the map on the table. A deep sigh escaped me as I began to move the markers around the map. I had hoped to continue the offensive and capture more land and slaves than this. I'll still get the chance, but we'll have to be on the defensive for a time. I should be certain to order the defenders to capture the enemy whenever possible. Our defense should hold up well. Archers are far easier to cultivate and train than mages are, which means I can field more archers than they can field mages. The range of spells and arrows are roughly the same, so the mages' biggest advantages will be rapid maneuvers and the area of effect of their attacks. If I spread the archers out among the defenses and have them prioritize the mages or their mounts, we'll be able to hold out for quite some time, which means that if the orcs are smart, they'll try to starve us out. They have the supply line advantage, but I have the equipment advantage. They aren't able to field archers because their equipment is in Yurna, where they were expecting to be invaded. Once I add the reinforcing archers to the legions, we will be able to go on the offensive again and secure a supply line. They will have started moving the equipment back here by now, but I have ambushes and traps in place to prevent their delivery. If that doesn't work, we'll be in a sore spot. However, all of this is to secure more orc slaves and turn them into vampires. I don't need to win this war. I just need to drag it out. We'll need as many bodies as we can get our hands on to take the Night Kingdom's capital. King Lofen has kept most of the troops out of Paranoia. It was unusually gracious of him to grant me the archers that are on their way, although I suspect the request didn't even make it to his ear. The reason I'm getting reinforcements at all is likely due to vampiric subterfuge. I'll have to clean house once I take the throne. I finished rearranging the markers and walked over to the nearest window, pulling back the curtain. The clouds that had blanketed the sky all day had moved on, leaving a field of glimmering stars in their wake. I opened the window and leaned out, taking in the view. One must take time to appreciate the smaller things in life, or else be crushed by the larger ones. Before I could get my fill of the sights, another bout of exhaustion took me. Bedtime already? I stifled a yawn, then closed the window and the curtain. I took a step toward my bed and stumbled, managing to catch myself on a chair. I looked at the hand that was now supporting my weight, but it looked alien. It is definitely my hand, but my mind refuses to recognize it. Depersonalization. Have I been drugged? Might one of my precautions slipped, or am I just that tired? It had been a long day, fraught with stress and worry. Even as the thought of being poisoned caused my adrenaline to surge, my eyelids drooped. I don't have the sweats, coughs, or shakiness that are indicative of most poisons. Why would someone use an anesthetic to try to assassinate me? What kind of anesthetic works on a fully fed half-breed vampire? Even as I tried to figure out this mystery, I stumbled over to my bed and lay within my covers. I barely managed to kick my boots off before my eyes could no longer stay open, and I slipped into slumber. Finally! Something almost like a voice said from within my mind. What's happening? Didn't I fall asleep? Is this a dream? I looked around but saw nothing. No, not nothing. Darkness, palpable darkness, darker even than the darkness that resides within me, a true abyss, and I was within it. It is the time that we should meet. Who are you? What do you want? I ran out of breath and could not take another. You do not need to speak. I know your mind and soul better than you do. I panicked at the lack of air for a few moments before I realized that it didn't matter. I don't need to breathe? Is this really a dream then? Why am I so cognizant? What is this? Your mind is frantic. Focus your thoughts and direct them to me. Focus my thoughts? Easy to say, not easy to do. Plenty of subjects rushed through my mind, but above all stood one question. What in the hells is going on here? The hells? Quite astute of you, but no, not the hells. Close, though. I focused on the non-voice, ignoring the inky blackness that surrounded me and the lack of air in my lungs. This has to be magic. Unfamiliar magic, but magic nonetheless. If this entity wished me harm, I would be harmed by now. I steeled myself against my rising panic. "What is the meaning of this?" I demanded. "An introduction, to ease you into knowing my voice so that when the time comes to hear it, you will not panic as you did moments ago. Speaking in riddles, infuriating, but I am in its power for now. I must play along. Who are you? Or what are you?" "Who am I?" A laughable question. What use is a name in this situation? It isn't as if you will tell anyone of me. No, it would be better to ignore such mundanities. As for what I am deep down, you already know. The being all but confirmed what I had already begun to fear to be true. It is a god, a magical spirit of grandiose power and mysterious purpose, which means that I am now a touched. I had always believed that the touched simply had mental instabilities, and that is not an uncommon perception of them. This god is right. I'll be telling no one of this. Why have you brought me here? What do you want of me? As I said, this meeting serves simply as an introduction, the god answered. It will save us time in the future, time that will be needed to achieve our goals. What goals could we possibly share? None. It would not be possible for one such as I to share a goal with a being of flesh such as yourself. However, our goals align, and for that reason, I am willing to aid you. You will achieve your goals, and in turn, I shall achieve my own. What sort of twisted goals could a being such as this have, and why would they align with my goals? Does it want me to conquer the world in its stead, or does it want the vampires to suffer? Perhaps it needs the orcs eliminated? No, the being laughed. Those are not your goals nor mine. Your goal is to be seen and heard, to be able to enforce your will and ignore those that you see as inferior. You do not need the world or a kingdom for this. You simply need power. Power and purpose, both of which I can guide you to. The words cut through me like a well-honed blade. The truth of the matter is that I do not fully believe that I can conquer the world with my plan. I had intended to take the Night Kingdom as my own and try to expand its borders, but I would have been content with executing King Lofen and exterminating the vampires that had created and then belittled me. This was a carefully kept secret, though, even from myself. My anger became stoked as I realized how easily this thing had read me and carved its way through my delusions. How can I, Master General Duke Kirain of House Yith, be relegated to mere words on a page to be read on a whim by a god? So you will give me power? I asked with a snarl. No, I cannot interfere that much. Instead, I will guide you to power and give you a purpose. This must come later, though. For now, you must know what it is to live without my guidance, it said with a cruel smile behind its words. You shall awaken, returning to your plans and your schemes. Try your best to see them succeed. We will meet again when the time comes. Before I could demand a fuller explanation, the darkness tightened around me. This embrace was freezing and forceful. I felt my bones crush and break as I was swallowed up by the abyss. Then I awoke with a start, grasping my blankets and glancing wildly around the room. I drew in a deep breath and let it leave me with a shudder. Everything in the room was just as I had left it, and the bright beams of sunrise had begun to peek through the curtains. I grabbed my arms and shuddered again. My skin was freezing, which caused another surge of fear as I realized what that implied. I hadn't been dreaming. "Fuck off!" I shouted as I landed a kick into Nick's gut. Our training sessions have been getting more intense as Nick becomes more familiar with swordplay. My strength, speed, and experience are all still superior to his, but now I'm actually counting on them in our sparring matches. The little shit almost landed that last strike. Thankfully for my pride, he'd let his guard down. "Let's take a break," I grumbled as Nick doubled over and wheezed. Yeah, okay," he breathlessly replied. I snatched the wooden training sword from his grip as I walked past and placed the swords back on their racks. Being a sword-fighting instructor doesn't seem to be my calling. Most teachers would be thrilled at the rapid progress of their students, but Nick's progress rubs me the wrong way. I can't even nail down exactly why, which just add further frustration to the mix. Am I jealous of how easily he learns what I teach him? A little, but not enough to cause these feelings. Do I think it's unfair that he has 10 to lean on? Absolutely, but it is what it is. Plus, That isn't really his fault. Is the speed in which he picks up foreign concepts unnatural and abhorrent? Yes, but I'm used to working with freaks. Yulk, for instance. The silent jab at my brother brought a small smile to my face. We've been here for 3 days, and during that time, Nick and Yulk have been running around doing various things. Nick's been having to work as a translator when Regent Oakmore is busy, and Yulk has been spending a lot of time with his former mentor, presumably researching, but if it were anyone other than Yulk, I'd have my doubts. This has left me to hang out with Renv, who has been awaiting his uncle's return. I glanced at the dwarf, who was currently playing with the blades of grass that surround the training ring. He'd been watching our training sessions, mostly so that he could keep me company when Nick had to run off. I've learned a lot about this part of Bolasir thanks to him. I almost got you that time, Nick said, grievously misunderstanding my expression. And? I asked, my smile instantly dissipating. You feel good about that? Nothing fills a grave quicker than almost. If I had been trying to kill you, you would be dead. Maybe, but 10 would have probably interfered if things went that far. Yeah, and I'm sure that comes free of consequence. I rolled my eyes and spat in the grass. You and I both know better than that. Nothing is free, and you need to be especially wary when the cost is a mystery. Yeah, he sighed. You're right. You're making good progress, I said, adjusting my tone a tad. Actually, you've made the fastest leap in progress that I've ever seen. But winning a race is far more important than running it, so you shouldn't be content with just making progress. Being content leads to being complacent, and complacency is death's most commonly received invitation. You've almost met your end already, and if you die, you're never going to see Cass again. My lecture was met with silence as Renv stood up and started walking over to us. Nick's expression was dark, and for a moment I thought I'd gone too far. His jaw was set and his fists were clenched, but after a moment he relaxed a bit. What if, he said softly. What if what? I asked. Well, I'm pretty sure that when I died in my world I came here. What if when I die here, I go back to my world? Our eyes met, and his expression was completely sincere. I stared at him for a moment, then burst out laughing. His sincerity turned to shock. What? He asked. What's funny? How in the hells does a moron like you manage to wield a blade without slicing your foot off? I laughed. What do you mean? How am I a moron? And a dumbass on top of it all, I said, as I managed to get my laughter under control. You don't even know that you actually died in your world, and even if you did, why would dying here bring you back to your world anyway? Why wouldn't it take you to a completely different world instead? Talk about jumping to conclusions, I cut him off with a chuckle. More like leaping in your case. What's funny? Renv asked. Nothing, Nick answered with an angry tone. Yeah, don't worry about it, I said. So what's today's plan for when Nick goes to work, Renvi? Well, my uncle should have gotten back this morning, so I was thinking we'd go visit him. I'd have liked to have Yulk along, but... Yeah, he's busy, I laughed. We'd have to drag him kicking and screaming. Since we'd be getting between him and knowledge, he might even put up a real fight. Best to avoid that, then. What do you think? Should we head out now? Yeah, we might as well. Best get going before the Regent summons Nick. I nodded, and Renv took the lead. He told one of the guards where Nick was going, and we proceeded to leave the training pit. I'm actually going to miss this training area when we move on. It's a far sight better than the one we have in New Leva. Hells, it's even better than the one that the Adventurers Guild uses in Kirkana. This training pit has multiple open areas where people can spar in different conditions, like sand, gravel, mud, dirt, and even grass. It also has training dummies that have regeneration enchantments, which is something we should look into for New Leva. Maybe for the wall, too, so poor Naomi doesn't have to fix it every time Yulk practices his spells, though she might miss the free meals. So your uncle owns the business you work at? What about your parents? Nick asked. It's more like a conglomeration of businesses, but yeah. My ma and pop both like working with their hands, so they own and operate a branch of the manufacturing side of the company. Since I like to travel, I work with my uncle more than I work with them. Renv chuckled. They're much more tolerant of my occupation than they are my brother's, though, that's for sure. What does your brother do? He's a quack, or at least that's what people call him. He experiments with various chemicals and their effects on health, then tries to hawk the finished product. The dwarf sighed. He doesn't trust healing magic or potions, but they're much faster than any of the products he's been able to produce. I think it's a good thing not to rely solely on magic, Nick said, though he should be careful when experimenting with painkillers. Because they can be addictive and deadly, Renv asked. Bit of wisdom from your world, right? Yeah, that already happened here. He made some painkillers out of a plant that people use to get high, and convinced a few people to try them. They worked, of course, but his customers got addicted to them. It was a huge mess, and a couple of people died because of them. The court found him guilty of negligence because he didn't do a long-term study before selling the product, and they fined him so heavily that he had to sell his lab. Now he works out of his house. I'm sorry, that must have been rough on your family. It was rougher on him than on my family. It's pretty well known that he's cut his relations with us, so it didn't harm our reputation. Still, it's not fun to see family fall like that. The conversation petered out as we continued our trek. Our path avoided the main square, which is where the dragon had been staying. It's just as well we didn't need to give Regent Oakmore the chance to pull Nick into something. Finally, we approached a large building that was made of small, well-cut stone bricks. Each brick was engraved with a vine-like pattern, which was filled with what appeared to be silver. Here we are, my uncle's offices, Renv said with a grin. Follow me. Renv pushed open one of the solid wooden doors, which were about twice his height. I expected to hear the creak of hinges, but the door opened silently and with very little effort. I raised my eyebrows. Whoever installed the doors had known what they were doing. The inside of the building was even more impressive. The floor was hardwood and well-polished, and each wall had some form of art on it. Paintings, monster trophies, and even weaponry were well positioned to vie for attention. In the center of the room was an expensive-looking desk, and behind the desk was a female gnome wearing well-tailored clothing. Hi, Sierna, Renv said with a wave. Here to see the boss. Go on in, sweetie, Sierna said with a warm smile. He's been worrying about you. He'll be glad to see you're safe. Thanks. Renv led us to the right of the desk and through another well-built door, which led to a staircase. We marched up the stairs and found another pair of doors. Renv opened the one on our left and walked inside. Nick and I glanced at each other and followed. Uncle! Welcome back! Renv said, raising his arms in a joyful expression. Renv, my boy, thank the gods! It's so good to see you well! A rotund dwarf stood from his desk and embraced Renv hard enough that I heard bones pop. I heard about the bandit attack and was worried sick. Come now, uncle! Renv returned the embrace as best he could. I'm the one who sent word, you needn't have worried. You forgot to sign the letter then. The large dwarf released his hold on Renv. What happened to your guards? Renv trailed off and gulped. They didn't make it. Norv, Crackton, and Tell are dead. Oh gods, I'm sorry, boy. I know you were close. They were good kids. We'll make sure their families are well taken care of. Renv's uncle put his hand on his nephew's shoulder and gave it a squeeze. Then he turned to look at Nick and I. So, who are these? He trailed off as he got a good look at Nick. Wait. Oh yeah, introductions. Uncle, this is Nick Smith and Nash Alta. Nick is the human you've probably heard about. The one who woke King Icinerath? Yep, Renv said as he turned to us. Nick, Nash, this is my Uncle Don. Don Marfix, pleasure to meet you, Don said as he grabbed my hand and shook it. Don's grip was surprisingly strong, and I fought the urge to compete. After a couple of shakes, he turned to Nick and did the same. It is an immense pleasure to meet you both, Don said. A member of the famed Alta family and the mysterious human everyone's been talking about. How did you manage this, Renvi? They're the ones who saved me from the bandits, Renv beamed. I brought them here because I thought you would want to meet them and give them a reward. There's another one, Yolk Alta, but he's with Omira right now. The Eternal? Yeah, he was her student or something and they're currently catching up, or something. Well, it's good to see you're getting some company. Don chuckled and turned back to Nick and I. I'd be happy to reward you for your kindness toward my dear nephew. You're adventurers, right? Yes, I answered. Good. Camping out under the stars has its own appeal, of course, but there's nothing like a comfortable bed. Don walked over to his desk. So these will be invaluable to you. He opened one of his desk's drawers and pulled out a piece of paper. He grabbed a pen and began to write. He mumbled to himself for a bit, then gave the paper to Renv. Renv read the paper and nodded. You'll need to go to one of our warehouses to pick up the reward, but I think you'll like it. Okay, Renv grinned. Thanks, Uncle. Happy to do it. Come see me again sometime. Renv nodded, and we followed him out of the room. Sierna waved at us as we left the building. Nick and I remained silent while we walked, seemingly ignoring the obvious question. It almost felt like a competition to see who would ask first. After a few moments, I couldn't wrestle my curiosity any longer and broke the silence. So, what's the reward? I asked. I don't know, Renv chuckled. The paper is an order form, but I don't recognize the product code. Damn it, I muttered under my breath. We continued following Renv until we came upon a building that wasn't nearly as fancy as Don's office. It didn't look ramshackle, but it was obvious that very little care was spent towards its appearance. Despite its lack of aesthetic, it was very impressive in size. I took in the sights as we followed Renv into the building. Large bay doors led to carts that were in the process of being loaded and unloaded. Huge stables kept nurses sheltered, fed, and watered, and there were many people running around tending to various tasks. Our strange-looking group got a few curious stares, but nobody stopped us. We walked up a flight of stairs and Renv knocked on one of the doors. Come in, a voice shouted from behind the door. Renv opened the door and led us through. This room seemed like the opposite of Don's office. It had no decoration on the walls, the floor was made of cheap wood, and the desk was more like a table. The room was barely lit by a single candelabra in one of the corners. Behind the table, masquerading as a desk, was an elf who was nearly buried in papers. Her disheveled blonde hair glimmered in the candlelight as she peeked over one of the many stacks. Oh, hi, Renv, the elf said as she ran her fingers through her hair in a futile attempt to straighten it. What's up? Hey, hurrah, I've got an order form from my uncle, Renv said as he gave her the paper. These two saved my life, and that's their reward. Saved your life? She asked with a raised eyebrow as she read the form. Whoa, okay. Guess you're not kidding. Wait here, I'll be right back. Hurrah stood quickly and practically ran out of the room. Renv looked at us with a grin, but we returned his expression with befuddlement. We stood there waiting awkwardly, and after what felt like an eternity later, Hurrah returned with 3 small boxes. She gave Nick one of the boxes and handed me the other 2. Here you go, she said. Nick opened his box and pulled out a necklace with a metal tag on it. The necklace's chain was made of gold, and the tag was emblazoned with various jewels. It also had writing on it, which caused Nick and I to share a glance. Neither of us could read the writing. Looks fancy, I said. What is it? This is an identifier that will allow you to stay at any of the Marfix inns, absolutely free of charge, Hurrah explained. Simply show it to the clerk at the front desk, and you will be given a room, assuming there's one available, of course. This also comes with 1 free meal per day of your stay and unlimited access to any available amenities. That's awesome, Renv said. Uncle really outdid himself. Really? Nick asked. Are these inns fancy? Very fancy, yes, Hurrah answered. What amenities are available depend on the inn in question, but all of them have the very best of whatever is available. Some people even consider our inns to be vacation spots in their own right. Where can we find them? I asked. We have inns located in every capital city on the continent. You simply need to look for a sign with the symbol that's on the back of the necklace to find them. I watched as Nick turned over the necklace. It was a little hard to make out in the candlelight, but the symbol engraved on the back looked like a dragon wearing a nightcap and sleeping comfortably on a bed. Nick and I shared another glance. Thank you, I said. This will definitely be useful in our travels. Now you guys won't have to stay in taverns and stuff, Renv beamed. A soft bed sounds good to me, Nick said. Is there one here?